The violet sunset painted the church windows crimson as Violet Davis stood motionless at the altar, her trembling hands clutching a wilting bouquet of wildflowers. At 18 years old, she was moments away from becoming the wife of Harold Emerson, the 54-year-old banker who owned half of San Angelo, Texas. The year was 1875, and in this dusty frontier town, such arrangements were not uncommon, especially when a family faced financial ruin as severe as the Davis homestead did. "Dearly beloved," intoned Reverend Phillips, his voice echoing through the small wooden church filled with the town's most prominent citizens. "We are gathered here today." Violet's gaze remained fixed on the warped floorboards beneath her satin shoes. She couldn't bear to look at her soon-to-be husband, whose breath smelled of tobacco and whiskey, whose cold eyes had appraised her like cattle at auction when her father first proposed the arrangement. 3 months ago, her life had been different, full of dreams of adventure and real love. Now, she was being sold to save her family's farm. The Reverend's words faded to a distant hum as Violet thought of her mother's tearful explanation. "Sometimes, daughter, women must make sacrifices for family." Her father had refused to meet her eyes when the arrangement was made final, knowing he was trading his daughter's future for his own salvation from debt. The church doors suddenly crashed open with such force that the hinges groaned in protest. Sunlight blazed through the entrance, silhouetting a tall figure. "Stop!" The command thundered through the church, silencing the Reverend mid-sentence. The congregation collectively gasped and turned. Violet's heart leaped into her throat as she finally raised her eyes. A cowboy stood in the doorway, dust still settling around his boots. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Violet recognized him instantly. Yates Dawson, the ranch hand who had worked her family's land last summer before riding west to seek his fortune. "This wedding will not proceed," Yates declared, striding down the aisle. His spurs jangled with each purposeful step. Harold Emerson's face contorted with rage. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded, his jowls quivering. Yates removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and piercing blue eyes that fixed directly on Violet. "Miss Davis is not marrying you today or any day, Mr. Emerson." The Reverend cleared his throat nervously. "Young man, this is highly irregular." "I must ask you to. I have proof," Yates continued, pulling a folded document from inside his leather vest, "that Mr. Emerson here has been manipulating land prices throughout the county. He's been foreclosing on honest folk after artificially driving them into debt." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Violet's father, Thomas Davis, rose from his seat, his expression a mixture of confusion and faint hope. "That's preposterous," Emerson sputtered. "This vagabond comes in here spouting lies, not lies, sir." Yates handed the document to Sheriff Callahan, who had stood up from his pew near the back. "Records showing how you've been working with the railroad company to drive down land values before buying properties at a fraction of their worth. And there's more evidence that you've been charging double interest on loans to the Davis family." The sheriff scanned the document, his bushy eyebrows rising progressively higher. "These appear to be banking records, Harold. Your signature is all over them." Violet's mother clutched her husband's arm. "Thomas, is this true? Has he been cheating us?" Harold Emerson lunged toward Yates, but 2 men from the congregation stepped forward to restrain him. "You miserable whelp! I'll see you hanged for this." Yates didn't flinch. His eyes found Violet's again, and in them she saw a warmth that had haunted her dreams since he'd left San Angelo nearly a year ago. "Miss Davis," he said, softer now, "I apologize for my tardiness. I came as soon as I learned of this arrangement." Violet found her voice at last. "How did you know?" Martha Jenkins wrote to me. He nodded toward the milliner's daughter, who gave Violet a small smile from her seat. "She knew I wouldn't want to see you forced into such a match." Sheriff Callahan was examining the papers more closely now. "Harold Emerson, I believe we need to continue this discussion down at my office." "This is absurd." Emerson struggled against the men holding him. "She agreed to marry me. Her father signed a contract based on fraudulent claims," Yates countered. "Which makes it null and void by my understanding." Thomas Davis stepped into the aisle, his weathered face stern. "Is it true, Harold? Have you been swindling me, swindling this whole town?" The banker's silence was damning. The sheriff motioned to his deputy, and together they escorted a still protesting Emerson from the church. In the chaos that followed, Violet found herself standing before Yates, her bouquet forgotten on the floor between them. "Why did you come back?" she whispered, aware that the entire congregation was watching. "I made a promise to myself," Yates said, his voice low and fervent, "that I would make something of myself and return to San Angelo, to you. But you never said anything before you left." "I was a penniless ranch hand with nothing to offer but hard work and dreams," he replied. "What right did I have to speak of feelings when I couldn't provide a future?" Reverend Phillips awkwardly cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should adjourn for today." The congregation began to disperse, buzzing with the scandal that would undoubtedly fuel gossip throughout San Angelo for months to come. Violet's parents approached cautiously. "Mr. Dawson," her father said stiffly, "it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude." Yates nodded respectfully. "No debt, sir. I couldn't stand by and watch this happen, not to your family, and especially not to your daughter." "And what exactly are your intentions toward my daughter?" Thomas asked, eyeing the young cowboy warily. Yates looked directly at Violet, not her father. "That would be for Miss Davis to decide, sir. I've come back with more than just accusations against Emerson. I've spent the past year establishing myself. I now own a promising silver claim near Tucson and have purchased land for a ranch." Violet's mother touched her husband's arm. "Thomas, perhaps we should continue this discussion at home." As they left the church, Violet walked beside Yates, maintaining a proper distance but feeling an invisible thread pulling them together. "You really came back for me?" she asked once they were outside in the late afternoon sun. "I never truly left," Yates said simply. "Not in the ways that matter." The Davis homestead sat 3 miles outside of town, a modest single-story house with a broad porch and faded white paint peeling under the Texas sun. The barn leaned slightly eastward, weathered by years of dust storms and neglect. What had once been a thriving cattle operation had dwindled to a few milk cows and chickens, as Thomas Davis had been forced to sell off his herd to meet Emerson's increasingly demanding loan payments. They arrived as the sun was setting, the family wagon creaking under their weight. Violet had changed from her wedding dress into a simple blue cotton frock, the elaborate white gown folded away in a trunk, perhaps never to be worn again. Yates tethered his horse to the hitching post and helped Violet's mother down from the wagon with gentle respect. "Please join us for supper, Mr. Dawson," Margaret Davis said, her earlier shock giving way to gracious hospitality. "It's the least we can offer after your timely intervention." Inside, over a meal of corn bread and stew, Yates explained how he had traveled west after leaving San Angelo, working cattle drives until he had enough money to stake a prospecting claim. "Fortune smiled on me," he said modestly. "The claim proved more valuable than I expected. I've been able to purchase good grazing land near Tucson, with plans to start a breeding operation with Hereford stock." Thomas Davis listened intently, asking pointed questions about the venture. Violet could see her father assessing Yates not just as a potential suitor for his daughter, but as a man of business. "And the papers you brought against Emerson?" Thomas asked. "How did you come by those?" Yates set down his fork. "When I was in El Paso, I encountered Emerson's former clerk, a man named Whitman. He'd been dismissed after questioning some of Emerson's accounting practices. When I mentioned I was from San Angelo, he became agitated, especially after learning about the Davis name. He had records copies he'd made before being forced out showing how Emerson had been manipulating interest rates and property valuations." "And when you learned of the wedding plans?" Margaret asked. Yates looked at Violet, his expression somber. "I rode day and night to get here." After supper, Violet and Yates stepped onto the porch while her parents remained inside, giving them a moment of privacy, albeit with the front door conspicuously ajar. "You could have written," Violet said, breaking the silence. "All these months I thought you'd forgotten about San Angelo." "About me?" Yates leaned against the porch railing, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "I almost did several times, but what could I have said? That I was a man with nothing but hopes, that I thought about you every day." He turned to face her. "I wanted to return with more than just words, Violet." "So instead, you let me believe you'd moved on," she said, a trace of hurt in her voice. "Left me to think I meant nothing to you." "You meant everything," he countered quietly. "That's why I had to make something of myself first." A cool evening breeze lifted the loose tendrils of hair from Violet's neck. "And now that you've made your fortune and saved me from a loveless marriage, what happens now, Yates?" "That depends," he said, his gaze steady. "I didn't come back just to stop a wedding. I came back to ask if you might consider a future with me when you're ready. Not tomorrow or next week. I understand you need time after today's events." Violet studied him in the fading light. He had changed in the past year, not just in his more prosperous appearance, but in the confidence he carried himself with. Yet his eyes were the same, honest, direct, with that quiet intensity that had first caught her attention when he worked on her father's ranch. "I spent this whole day preparing to marry a man I could never love," she said finally. "I had resigned myself to a life without choice or passion, and then you appeared like something from a dream." She took a tentative step closer to him. "I don't need much time, Yates. I've had a year of thinking you were gone forever. I don't want to waste more time pretending I don't know my own heart." His expression softened, and for a moment, Violet thought he might reach for her. Instead, he respectfully maintained his distance, mindful of her parents just inside. "Then I'll speak with your father properly tomorrow," he said, "and we can begin whatever comes next together." From inside the house came the sound of a throat being pointedly cleared, and both Violet and Yates smiled, recognizing the universal signal that their private conversation had reached its permitted duration. "Until tomorrow," Violet said softly as they moved toward the door. Yates nodded, replacing his hat. "Until tomorrow." The next morning brought a flurry of activity to San Angelo. News of Harold Emerson's arrest had spread through town like wildfire, and the sheriff's office was besieged by concerned citizens and creditors. The bank remained closed, with a hastily written notice pinned to the door explaining that operations would resume once the accounts could be properly audited. Violet sat at her bedroom window, watching as her father and Yates walked the boundaries of the Davis property, deep in discussion. The two men had been out since dawn, Yates insisting on understanding exactly how Emerson had undermined the family's finances. Margaret Davis entered with a fresh pressed dress over her arm. "I've mended your blue Sunday dress. I thought you might want to wear it when you go into town later." Violet turned from the window. "Are we going into town?" Her mother gave her a knowing look. Mr. Dawson mentioned taking you to dinner at the hotel restaurant. Your father has given his permission, provided you're home before sundown. A warm flush crept into Violet's cheeks. He's only just returned, Mother. And yet it seems as though no time has passed at all, the way you two look at each other. Margaret laid the dress carefully on the bed. I saw it last summer, the way your eyes followed him when he worked in the fields. The way he always volunteered for tasks that brought him near the house. You never said anything. What was there to say? He was a ranch hand with no prospects, and you were barely 17. Margaret sat beside her daughter on the bed. But I wondered when he left so suddenly if there had been words between you. Violet shook her head. No words, just moments. Times when our eyes would meet across the dinner table when he took meals with the hands, or when he would tip his hat to me in town. She smiled at the memory. Once, when I was gathering eggs, he helped me chase down a hen that had escaped the coop. We were both laughing so hard we could barely breathe. And now he returns, a man of means and clear intentions. Margaret touched her daughter's cheek. Life has strange ways of unfolding, doesn't it? Yesterday morning, I was preparing you for a marriage I knew would bring you no joy. Today, I'm helping you dress for a dinner with a man whose very presence makes your eyes shine. Later that afternoon, Yates arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, wearing a clean shirt and his best coat, his hair still damp from washing. He had arranged for a proper buggy rather than riding horseback, and Thomas Davis nodded approvingly at the sight. I expect you back before dark, he told Violet as he helped her into the buggy. To Yates, he added, the town's still in an uproar over Emerson. Be mindful of trouble. Yes, sir, Yates replied respectfully. We'll stay well clear of it. As they rode toward town, Violet felt a curious mixture of nervousness and ease. This was Yates, the man she had watched from afar for months during his time at the ranch, yet now they were together in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Your father and I had a productive discussion this morning, Yates said as they traveled. He's a knowledgeable cattleman. With Emerson's fraudulent interest removed, the ranch could be profitable again with some investment. Violet glanced at him. Is that what you discussed all morning? Cattle? Yates smiled. Not entirely. I also asked his permission to court you properly. Her heart skipped. And he said that would be entirely up to you, Yates replied, his eyes on the road. But that if you were agreeable, he would not stand in our way. I see. Violet smoothed her skirts. And if I am agreeable, then I hope to spend the coming weeks proving I'm worthy of your consideration. He guided the buggy around a rut in the road. I've taken a room at the hotel for now. I plan to be in San Angelo for some time, helping sort through Emerson's schemes and making sure your family's debts are properly recalculated. And then, Violet asked, realizing she was holding her breath. Then, if you're willing, I'd like you to see my land near Tucson. Not alone. Of course, perhaps your mother could accompany us. I want you to know what kind of life I'm offering before you make any decisions. As they entered San Angelo, they could see an unusual amount of activity around the sheriff's office. A small crowd had gathered, and voices were raised in anger. Perhaps we should avoid Main Street, Yates suggested, turning the buggy down a side road. The hotel stood at the edge of town, a 3-story building that represented the height of luxury in San Angelo. Its dining room was known as the finest establishment between San Antonio and El Paso, with white tablecloths and actual silverware instead of tin. Yates helped Violet down from the buggy and offered his arm as they entered. The maitre d' greeted them warmly, leading them to a table in the corner with a view of the hotel's small garden. I never dreamed I would dine here, Violet confessed once they were seated. Father always said it was for city folk with more money than sense. Yates chuckled. My first night back in town, I almost didn't come in. Felt like I didn't belong. But I figured if I was going to be taken seriously in business matters, I needed to present myself accordingly. They ordered a modest meal, and as they ate, Yates told Violet about his travels, the cattle drive to Kansas, the mining camps of Arizona Territory, the characters he had met along the way. In turn, she spoke of the changes in San Angelo, careful to avoid dwelling on Emerson and the wedding that had almost been. "I should have written to you," Yates admitted as their plates were cleared. "It was pride that stopped me. I didn't want you to know how many times I failed before finding that silver vein." "And I should have been braver," Violet replied. "When Father first arranged the marriage to Emerson, I should have spoken up, should have told him how I felt about you." Yates reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "We're here now. That's what matters." A commotion from the hotel lobby interrupted their moment. Raised voices and heavy footsteps approached the dining room. Then the doors burst open to reveal Sheriff Callahan and his deputy, followed by several angry-looking men. "There he is," one man shouted, pointing at Yates. "Dawson." The sheriff moved quickly to intercept the group. "Now, gentlemen, this is a respectable establishment, respectable." Another man scoffed. "Like that paper he brought against Emerson. Convenient how it appeared just as the Davis girl was to be married." Yates stood slowly, placing himself between the approaching men and Violet. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" The first man, whom Violet recognized as Emerson's business associate Gerald Wilkes, stepped forward. "Emerson claims those documents were forged, says you fabricated the whole thing to stop the wedding." "That's ridiculous," Violet interjected, rising as well. The sheriff himself verified the papers. Sheriff Callahan held up his hands for calm. "That's right, and we're still investigating. But Emerson's been released on bail pending further inquiry. His lawyer is claiming the evidence was obtained illegally." "Conveniently timed, wouldn't you say, Dawson?" Wilkes sneered. "Riding in like some hero to save the girl. Folks are starting to wonder if you didn't create this whole situation just to insert yourself where you're not wanted." Yates remained calm. "The documents speak for themselves. If Emerson wants to challenge their authenticity in court, that's his right. Meanwhile, the bank's closed and honest people can't access their money." Another man shouted. "All because of your accusations." The situation was escalating, with more hotel patrons turning to watch the confrontation. Violet could see the maitre d' nervously signaling to hotel security. "We were just leaving," Yates said firmly, placing money on the table and offering his arm to Violet. "Sheriff, I trust you can maintain order here," Callahan nodded. "I suggest you get Miss Davis home safely, Mr. Dawson." Tempers are running high today. As they made their way through the lobby, Violet could feel hostile eyes following them. Outside, Yates quickly helped her into the buggy and set off toward the Davis homestead at a brisk pace. "I'm sorry about that," he said once they were clear of town. "I didn't expect Emerson to be released so quickly." "It's not your fault," Violet assured him. "But what if? What if they really do question the documents?" Yates's expression hardened. "The documents are genuine. Whitman is on his way from El Paso to testify to that. But Emerson has influence, and money can buy time and sympathy." "Will you stay until this is resolved?" Violet asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "I'm not going anywhere," Yates promised, his hand briefly covering hers. "Not this time." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange mixture of tension and joy. While San Angelo buzzed with speculation about Emerson's case and Yates's role in exposing the banker's schemes, Violet and Yates spent their days rebuilding their connection. He called at the Davis home each morning, sometimes bringing small gifts, fresh flowers, ribbon for Violet's hair, books he thought she might enjoy. They would walk the property together, Yates pointing out improvements that could be made once the financial situation was clarified. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, sometimes talking late into the night while her parents pretended not to eavesdrop from inside. Violet found herself opening up about dreams she had never shared with anyone, her desire to see more of the world beyond Texas, her secret wish to learn bookkeeping and business management. "My mother taught me figures when I was young," she confessed one evening as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "Father always said it was useless knowledge for a girl, but I enjoyed it. During the hard times, I would sometimes review his accounts, looking for ways we might economize further." "You have a sharp mind," Yates said admiringly. "On my ranch, you would be a full partner, not just a wife." "I've seen too many operations fail because the husband wouldn't listen to his wife's counsel." The idea of being valued for her mind as much as for her companionship was revolutionary to Violet, who had been raised with clear expectations of a woman's place. As their connection deepened, so did the troubles in town. Emerson had rallied support among certain influential citizens, casting doubt on Yates's character and motivations. Rumors swirled that Yates had personal reasons for wanting to destroy Emerson, that the evidence was suspect, that the timing of his return was too convenient to be coincidence. When Whitman finally arrived from El Paso, he was immediately sequestered at the sheriff's office, giving a formal deposition about the documents and his time working for Emerson. Yates spent much of that day in town, returning to the Davis homestead with a grim expression. "Emerson's lawyers are challenging everything," he reported that evening as the family gathered in the parlor. "They're questioning Whitman's credibility, suggesting he had personal grievances against Emerson." "Did he?" Thomas Davis asked bluntly. "Only that Emerson fired him for questioning illegal practices," Yates replied, "but they're twisting it, making it sound like revenge." Margaret Davis poured coffee for everyone. "What happens now?" "The circuit judge arrives next week. There will be a formal hearing to determine if charges should proceed against Emerson." Yates accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. "Until then, the bank remains under temporary management, and all of Emerson's questionable loans, including yours, Mr. Davis, are suspended." "And if the judge rules in Emerson's favor?" Violet asked quietly. Yates met her eyes steadily. "Then we fight it. I won't let him ruin your family or any of the other families he's targeted." That night, after her parents had retired, Violet and Yates remained on the porch, the lamplight from inside casting long shadows across the weathered boards. "There's something I haven't told you," Yates said after a long silence, "about why I left San Angelo so suddenly last year." Violet turned to him, curious. "I always wondered. One day you were here, the next gone without a word. Emerson threatened me." Yates's voice was low, his eyes fixed on the distant darkness. "He saw us, you and me, talking in town one afternoon. Nothing improper, you were purchasing supplies, I was loading the wagon, but apparently the way I looked at you caught his attention." "I remember that day," Violet said softly. "You told me about Wyoming, how you'd always wanted to see it." Yates nodded. "Later that evening, Emerson approached me outside the saloon, said he had his eye on the Davis property and on you, made it clear that a saddle tramp like me had best move on if I knew what was good for me or your family." Shock rippled through Violet. He was already planning this a year ago. But he only approached Father about the marriage 3 months past. "I believe he was biding his time, increasing your father's debt, making your family more desperate." Yates turned to face her fully. "I should have stayed and fought then. Instead, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by leaving, by trying to make my fortune elsewhere so I could return as someone worthy of you." "You were always worthy," Violet whispered, reaching for his hand. "Always." Their fingers intertwined, the touch sending warmth through Violet despite the cool evening air. For a moment, the troubles with Emerson, the uncertainty of the coming hearing, all of it seemed distant compared to the reality of Yates beside her. "I've thought about this moment for a year," Yates said, his voice husky with emotion. "Being here with you, holding your hand." "Just my hand?" Violet asked, surprising herself with her boldness. In the dim light, she saw Yates's eyes widen slightly before his expression softened. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Violet had never been kissed before. She had imagined it countless times, especially during those long summer days watching Yates work, but the reality was entirely different from her girlish fantasies. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, his touch respectful yet unmistakably passionate. When they parted, Violet felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. This was no longer just a rescue from an unwanted marriage or the renewal of an unspoken connection. This was the beginning of something profound, something that both thrilled and terrified her with its intensity. "I love you, Violet Davis," Yates said simply. "I think I have since that day you laughed while chasing chickens in your father's yard. And I promise you, whatever comes with Emerson and this hearing, we will face it together." The days leading up to the judge's arrival passed in a heightened state of tension throughout San Angelo. The town had effectively split into factions, those who believed Emerson's claims of innocence, and those who had long suspected the banker's dealings were not entirely above board. For the Davis family and Yates, it was a time of careful preparation. Thomas gathered all his loan documents and financial records. Yates and Whitman met daily at the sheriff's office, reviewing evidence and preparing testimony. Violet found herself taking on more responsibility at home as her parents were frequently in town, consulting with the temporary bank administrator about their actual financial position. The circuit judge, a stern-faced man named Hollister, arrived on a Tuesday morning. By noon, he had established his court in the town hall and issued summonses to all relevant parties to appear the following day. That evening, as the Davis family sat down to supper with Yates, a knock came at the door. Thomas answered it to find Sheriff Callahan standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Thomas," the sheriff said, nodding respectfully to the others inside. "I'm afraid I have some troubling news." "Has something happened with the hearing?" Yates asked, rising from his seat, in a manner of speaking. Callahan accepted the invitation to step inside. "Whitman is gone. Disappeared from his hotel room sometime last night. His belongings are still there, but there's no sign of him." "Gone," Violet echoed. "How is that possible? Could he have simply left town?" Callahan's expression was grave. "His horse is still in the livery. And there were signs of a struggle in his room, not much, but enough to concern me." Yates's face hardened. "Emerson." "That's a serious accusation," the sheriff cautioned. "I have no evidence pointing to anyone specific." "Who else would benefit from Whitman's disappearance right before the hearing?" Yates countered. "Without him to authenticate the documents, it's just my word against Emerson's, and he's made sure many in town question my motives." Thomas Davis pulled out a chair for the sheriff. "Sit down, Jim. Tell us everything." As Callahan detailed the discovery of Whitman's absence and the subsequent search, Violet watched Yates's face grow increasingly troubled. This was more than a financial dispute now. If Whitman had indeed been forcibly removed, they were dealing with something far more sinister. "I need to go into town," Yates said when the sheriff had finished. "If someone took Whitman, they may have left tracks, evidence. I've got my deputies searching," Callahan assured him. "The best thing you can do is prepare for the hearing tomorrow. Without Whitman, we'll need every other piece of evidence we can muster." After the sheriff departed, the mood around the dinner table was somber. When her parents excused themselves to review their financial papers once more, Violet found Yates on the porch, staring into the night with a troubled expression. "You're worried," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Without Whitman, the case against Emerson is weakened considerably," he admitted. "And I can't shake the feeling that his disappearance is just the beginning." Violet slipped her hand into his. "What can I do to help?" Yates turned to her, his expression softening. "You already are helping, just by believing in me. But I want you to be careful, Violet. Emerson has shown he's willing to go to extreme lengths to get what he wants. Until this is settled, don't go anywhere alone." "Do you think he would try to harm me?" Violet asked, the possibility sending a chill through her despite the warm evening. "I think a man who would force you into marriage to acquire your family's land is capable of almost anything," Yates replied grimly. "Especially now that he's been publicly humiliated." The hearing began promptly at 9 the next morning, with what seemed like half of San Angelo crowded into the town hall. Judge Hollister established order quickly, making it clear he would tolerate no outbursts or interruptions. Emerson sat with his lawyers at one table, immaculately dressed and projecting confident indignation. Yates, alongside Thomas Davis and Sheriff Callahan, occupied the other table. Violet and her mother sat in the first row of the public seating, both wearing their Sunday best. The proceedings began with the sheriff explaining the origin of the investigation, Yates's arrival with documents suggesting fraudulent practices, the subsequent review of bank records, and the corroborating testimony expected from the now missing Whitman. Emerson's lawyer, a slick-looking man named Preston from San Antonio, wasted no time attacking the evidence. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies all allegations of wrongdoing," Preston declared. "These supposed documents provided by Mr. Dawson were obtained under questionable circumstances from a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta against Mr. Emerson. And now, conveniently, this key witness is nowhere to be found." Judge Hollister peered over his spectacles. "The court is aware of Mr. Whitman's absence, Counselor. Sheriff Callahan has informed me of the ongoing search. We will proceed with the evidence at hand." For the next several hours, the hearing moved methodically through the allegations. Bank records were examined, loan agreements scrutinized. Thomas Davis testified about the ever-increasing interest rates on his loans, rates that didn't match the original agreement he had signed. Then came Yates's testimony. He explained how he had encountered Whitman in El Paso, how the former clerk had shared his concerns about Emerson's business practices, and how they had compared the documents with other legitimate banking records to verify their authenticity. "And you just happened to return to San Angelo on the very day Miss Davis was to marry Mr. Emerson?" Preston asked during cross-examination, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I returned as soon as I confirmed the documents were genuine and learned of the wedding," Yates replied evenly. "I couldn't allow Miss Davis to be forced into a marriage based on her father's fraudulent debt." "Forced?" Preston raised an eyebrow. "My understanding is that Miss Davis accepted the proposal willingly." From her seat, Violet could feel anger rising within her. There had been nothing willing about her acceptance, only resignation to what seemed inevitable. "Perhaps we should hear from Miss Davis herself," Judge Hollister suggested. Looking toward the gallery, Violet rose, smoothing her skirts nervously as she made her way to the witness chair. After being sworn in, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, determined to remain composed. "Miss Davis," the judge began kindly, "can you tell the court about your engagement to Mr. Emerson?" Violet took a deep breath. "3 months ago, Mr. Emerson came to our home and spoke privately with my father. Afterward, Father informed me that he had arranged for me to marry Mr. Emerson, explaining that our farm was deeply in debt, and this marriage would ensure our family's financial security." "And you agreed to this arrangement?" Preston asked. "I was given to understand there was no other option," Violet replied, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "My father believed, based on what Mr. Emerson had told him, that we would lose everything unless I married him." "But you were not forced," Preston pressed. "You could have refused." Violet met his gaze directly. "Sir, when your family faces ruin and you're told your sacrifice can prevent it, is that not its own form of coercion?" A murmur of approval rippled through the female portion of the audience. Judge Hollister tapped his gavel lightly. "Miss Davis," he said, "to your knowledge, was there any previous connection between Mr. Dawson and your family before his return to San Angelo?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Dawson worked as a ranch hand on our property for several months last year." "And the nature of your relationship with him during that time?" Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks, but answered truthfully. "We were acquaintances, Your Honor. He was an employee of my father's. We spoke occasionally, but always properly and usually in the presence of others." Preston approached the witness stand. "Yet now, barely 2 weeks after your wedding was interrupted, I understand Mr. Dawson is a frequent visitor to your home. Is that correct?" "He has been helping my father understand our true financial position," Violet replied. "And yes, we have begun a proper courtship with my parents' permission." "How convenient," Preston remarked, turning to face the judge. "Your Honor, the timeline here speaks for itself." Mr. Dawson clearly harbored feelings for Miss Davis, returned to prevent her marriage to a more established man, and fabricated evidence to discredit that man. This is a case of jealousy and manipulation, not banking fraud. Judge Hollister considered this. "Miss Davis, you may step down." "Thank you for your testimony." As Violet returned to her seat, she caught Yates's eye. His expression was worried but resolute, and she drew strength from his steady gaze. The hearing continued with Emerson taking the stand, presenting himself as a pillar of the community who had been unfairly maligned by a jealous rival. He explained away the discrepancies in loan documents as clerical errors, dismissed the accusations of manipulation as misunderstandings, and expressed deep concern for the missing Whitman, suggesting perhaps the man had fled to avoid being exposed as a forger. By late afternoon, both sides had presented their cases, and Judge Hollister called for closing statements. Preston went first, weaving a compelling narrative of Emerson as the wronged party and Yates as an opportunistic interloper. When it was the prosecution's turn, Sheriff Callahan was just rising to speak when the doors at the back of the town hall burst open. A deputy rushed in, breathing hard from exertion. "Your Honor," he called out, "we found Whitman." The crowd erupted in excited chatter, and Judge Hollister banged his gavel repeatedly for order. "Where is he, deputy? Bring him forward immediately." "He's at the doctor's, sir," the deputy explained. "We found him bound and gagged in an abandoned shed about 3 miles outside town. He's dehydrated and pretty roughed up, but alive." All eyes turned to Emerson, whose composed facade had suddenly cracked. His face had paled noticeably, and he was whispering frantically to his lawyer. "Your Honor," Preston began, "my client had nothing to do with Save It, counselor," the judge interrupted. This hearing is recessed until 9 tomorrow morning, when I expect Mr. Whitman, if he is medically able to be present for testimony." He fixed Emerson with a hard stare. "Sheriff, I suggest you keep a close eye on all parties involved until then." As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with this dramatic development, Violet hurried to Yates's side. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "If Whitman can testify about who took him, yes." Yates agreed. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Emerson is desperate now, which makes him more dangerous." Thomas and Margaret joined them, and the sheriff approached their group. "I'm posting a deputy at your farm tonight," Callahan told them, "just as a precaution." "We appreciate that, Jim," Thomas said. "Will you keep us informed about Whitman's condition?" "Of course. Doc Evans is with him now, says he should be well enough to testify tomorrow, God willing." The sheriff lowered his voice. "Between us, Whitman's already told us it was 2 men who grabbed him, strangers, not from San Angelo. But he overheard them mention Emerson's name when they thought he was unconscious." As they left the town hall, Violet noticed Emerson watching them from across the street, his expression cold with barely contained fury. She instinctively moved closer to Yates, who placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "Let's get you home," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." The night passed without incident, the deputy stationed on the Davis porch keeping vigilant watch. At dawn, they prepared to return to town for what they hoped would be the conclusion of the hearing. As they neared San Angelo, however, they saw smoke rising from the center of town. People were running in the streets, and shouts could be heard even from a distance. "Something's wrong," Yates said, urging the horses to a faster pace. They arrived to find chaos. The town hall was engulfed in flames, with citizens forming a bucket brigade to prevent the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. Sheriff Callahan was directing efforts, his face streaked with soot. "What happened?" Yates called out as they pulled up beside him. "Fire started about an hour ago," Callahan replied grimly. "No one was inside, thank God, but all the evidence for the hearing, the documents, the bank records, they were locked in my office overnight." "And Whitman?" Thomas asked. "Gone again." The sheriff's expression was thunderous. Doc Evans stepped out to get supplies, came back to find his examining room empty. No sign of struggle this time. Whitman just vanished. Violet scanned the crowd. "Where's Emerson?" "That's what I'd like to know," Callahan growled. "He's not at his home or the bank." His housekeeper said he left before dawn, supposedly to prepare for the hearing. Yates's face hardened with resolve. "He's running." "But where would he go?" Violet asked. "And why burn the town hall if he's just going to flee?" "Spite," Thomas suggested. "Or maybe he thinks without the evidence he can return later and claim innocence." Yates was already turning back toward the wagon. "Sheriff, can you spare any men?" "For what?" "To help search for Emerson. If he left before dawn, he's got hours of head start, but he'll be on horseback, probably heading for the border." Callahan shook his head regretfully. "Every able-bodied man is needed here to fight this fire and protect the town, but I can deputize you if you want to go after him yourself." Yates nodded. "Do it." "Yates, no," Violet protested. "It's too dangerous. Emerson is desperate. Who knows what he might do?" "That's exactly why I have to go," Yates replied, taking her hands in his. "If he escapes, your family will never be free of this. The truth will never come out." He looked to Thomas. "Sir, I need your fastest horse." Thomas hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Take the bay. He's got stamina for a long ride." While Thomas went to saddle the horse, Sheriff Callahan quickly deputized Yates, giving him the authority to apprehend Emerson. "Be careful," the sheriff warned. "Emerson's not known for violence, but cornered men do desperate things." Violet pulled Yates aside before he mounted. "You promised we would face this together," she reminded him, her voice tight with worry. "And we will," Yates assured her. "But right now, the best way I can protect our future, is to bring Emerson to justice." He cupped her face gently. "I will come back to you, Violet. That's a promise I intend to keep." With a final kiss that conveyed all the words they didn't have time to say, Yates mounted the bay and rode out of town, heading south toward the most likely route to the Mexican border. The hours that followed were among the most anxious of Violet's life. She helped with the fire brigade until the blaze was finally under control. The town hall reduced to a smoldering shell, but the surrounding buildings saved. All the while, her thoughts were with Yates, imagining him riding hard across the harsh Texas landscape in pursuit of a desperate man. By late afternoon, with the immediate crisis of the fire handled, Sheriff Callahan organized a meeting at the hotel restaurant, now serving as a temporary gathering place for town officials. Judge Hollister, looking weary and soot-stained, presided. "This deliberate destruction of evidence and the apparent abduction of a witness constitute serious crimes," the judge declared. "Even without the original documents, there is sufficient testimony to warrant Mr. Emerson's arrest and trial. If we can find him," someone muttered from the crowd. "Mr. Dawson is in pursuit as we speak," Callahan informed them. "And I've sent telegrams to every settlement within 50 miles to be on the lookout." As discussions continued about how to handle the banking crisis Emerson had left behind, Violet sat with her parents, half listening while her mind tracked the son's westward journey. How far had Yates gotten? Had he found any sign of Emerson? Just as dusk was falling, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Violet rushed to the window to see two riders approaching slowly down the main street. One was Yates, dusty and grim-faced. The other, slumped forward in his saddle with his hands bound to the pommel, was Harold Emerson. The town emptied onto the street as Yates delivered his prisoner to Sheriff Callahan. Emerson looked defeated, his fine clothes torn and dirty, blood caked on a gash above his eye. "Found him about 30 miles south, heading for the Rio Grande," Yates reported, dismounting stiffly. "He didn't come quietly." "Neither did Whitman, I'd wager," Callahan replied, gesturing to his deputies to take charge of the prisoner. "Any sign of him?" Yates shook his head. "Nothing. But Emerson might be more willing to talk now that he's facing serious charges." As Emerson was led away to the jail, Violet finally reached Yates's side. Without caring who might see, she threw her arms around him, relieved beyond words to find him safe. "You came back," she whispered against his shoulder. "I promised I would," he replied, holding her close despite his exhaustion. Over the next several days, the full extent of Emerson's schemes came to light. Under intense questioning and faced with the testimony of multiple victims of his fraudulent practices, he eventually revealed that Whitman had been taken across the border by hired men with instructions not to return. Whether the clerk was still alive remained unknown. Judge Hollister wasted no time in rendering his verdict. Emerson was found guilty of fraud, tampering with evidence, and arranging the abduction of a witness. He was sentenced to 15 years in the state penitentiary, his assets seized to repay his victims. For the Davis family, the outcome meant their debt was recalculated at the proper interest rate, reducing it to a manageable amount that Thomas could pay off within a few years. Other families in similar situations throughout the county also saw their financial burdens eased considerably. As for Yates and Violet, they found themselves at the center of San Angelo's attention, the heroic cowboy who had exposed corruption, and the brave young woman who had narrowly escaped a loveless marriage. Their courtship, now conducted in the open with the blessing of her parents, became something of a town sensation. One evening in late summer, nearly 2 months after the dramatic events at the town hall, Yates asked Violet to accompany him on a ride to a hilltop overlooking the Davis property. As the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in gold and amber, he took her hands in his. "I came back to San Angelo with one purpose: to save you from a fate you didn't deserve," he said softly. "I never dared hope that in doing so I might find my own greatest happiness." "And have you?" Violet asked, her heart quickening. "Every day with you has been a gift beyond measure," Yates replied, "but I find myself wanting more, wanting forever." He knelt before her, a small ring, simple but elegant, held between his fingers. "Violet Davis, will you marry me?" Not out of obligation or necessity, but because, like me, you can't imagine any future that doesn't have us facing it together. Tears of joy spilled onto Violet's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Yates. 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the Texas hills, and the Davis Ranch was showing signs of renewal under Thomas's revitalized management. Unlike the somber, tension-filled ceremony that had been interrupted months earlier, this celebration was filled with genuine joy and community support. Violet wore a dress of her own, choosing ivory satin with delicate lace her mother had saved for years, and carried a bouquet of bluebonnets and white roses. As she walked down the aisle of the newly rebuilt town hall, her eyes fixed on Yates waiting at the altar, she marveled at how drastically her life had changed in less than a year. Reverend Phillips, the same minister who had nearly married her to Emerson, now smiled warmly as he pronounced Yates and Violet husband and wife. When they kissed, sealing their vows before friends and family, the applause was genuine and heartfelt. The celebration continued well into the evening at the Davis homestead, with tables set up under oak trees strung with lanterns. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, a proper send-off as the couple prepared to journey west to their new home near Tucson. As twilight deepened into night, Yates led his bride away from the festivities for a moment of quiet beneath the stars. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Beyond words," Violet replied, leaning into his embrace. "I keep thinking about that day in the church, when you burst through the doors. How different everything would be if you had arrived even an hour later. I like to think fate wouldn't have allowed that marriage to proceed, with or without my dramatic entrance," Yates said with a smile. "Some things are simply meant to be, Violet, like us, exactly like us." He kissed her tenderly, then added, "Though I must admit, I'm glad I didn't have to test that theory. Riding into a church and shouting 'Stop' was dramatic enough for one lifetime." 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch outside Tucson had grown into one of the most respected breeding operations in the Arizona Territory. The main house, initially modest when Violet first arrived as a bride, had been expanded to accommodate their growing family: 4-year-old Thomas, named for his grandfather, and 2-year-old Margaret, her grandmother's namesake in both name and spirit. Violet had indeed become the full partner Yates had promised she would be, keeping the ranch's accounts with precision and developing a keen eye for quality livestock that complemented her husband's natural horsemanship. Together, they had built not just a successful business but a true home filled with love and purpose. News occasionally reached them from San Angelo. Harold Emerson remained in prison, his health reportedly failing. The town had recovered from his schemes, with a new banker, honest and transparent, taking over the rebuilt institution. Thomas and Margaret Davis visited twice yearly, delighting in their grandchildren and the life their daughter had created. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Yates surprised Violet with a special gift, the deed to her family's original homestead in San Angelo. "Your father isn't ready to retire yet," he explained as she examined the document in confusion. "But when he is, the land will be waiting for them. And perhaps someday it will pass to our children." "You purchased our ranch?" Violet asked, astonished. "When, how? It came up for sale last month," Yates replied. "Your father's been leasing it since we left, but the bank finally cleared the title for purchase. I thought it fitting that land brought us together after all." Violet embraced him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "From a ranch hand to land baron in 5 short years," she teased. "Not bad for a man who once claimed he had nothing to offer but hard work and dreams." "I had something else to offer, though I didn't know it then," Yates said, drawing her closer. "Love, the kind that would make a man ride day and night, burst into a church and challenge one of the most powerful men in the county." He smiled against her hair. "The kind that builds a life like this." As they stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in hues of fire and gold, their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of their nurse, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that silver claim?" she asked. "If you had returned to San Angelo still a saddle tramp, as Emerson called you?" Yates considered this. "I'd still have found a way to stop that wedding," he said finally. "The money made it easier, gave me resources and credibility. But loving you, that would have been enough reason to try, whatever the odds." "I believe you would have," Violet agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "And I'd like to think I would have found the courage to choose you, even without the dramatic rescue." "We'll never know," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I'm grateful every day that we didn't have to find out, that instead we got this life together." As darkness settled over the ranch, and they called their children in for supper, Violet felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become the foundation of her days. From a reluctant bride facing a future of quiet desperation, she had become a woman fully in command of her life, loved deeply and loving in return. And it had all begun with a single moment of courage, a church door flung open, a commanding voice calling, "Stop," and the chance to rewrite her own destiny.